Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Steven in New Hampshire, Yehud in South Carolina, Karen in Northern California, Bella in Florida, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Joe in the Inland Empire, Nancy in North Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Guy in Ohio, Shandor in the Bronx, Jonathan in LA, Paula, Lorraine in Texas, Chaim in Florida, Ellen in Southern California, Alan in New York City. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our very own Bella Rubin in Florida. Thank you so much, Bella, for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. A beautiful dedication to Sal and Nina and our AT group. Wishing you a very happy and healthy, sweet New Year. Amen. May we all be so blessed to have a year of blessing and sweetness. And Bella, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. Thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. It is our annual campaign. Join Bella in sponsoring AT. Donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Let's get to it. 2 short dafs enabling us to do a double. Get temporarily back on the Daf Yomi schedule. But I'm traveling to Texas tomorrow. Excuse me. To Texas tomorrow for Guns N' Moses opening night gala of the Austin Jewish Film Festival. You know anyone in Austin or you're there? Hope to see you there. So no class tomorrow, won't be able to do it. Neither Wednesday nor Thursday. But if all goes well with the travel plan, I should be back in LA early Friday morning and able to do our class at the normal Friday time, Friday at noon Pacific. So after today, skipping class Wednesday and Thursday and coming back on Friday. Okay, our dafs are pages 125 and 126 here in Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud, continuing our journey through chapter 8. And today, God willing, we'll complete Mishnah number 4 and open Mishnah number 5. Rav Acha bar Rav said to Ravina, a Maimar arrived at our locale and taught that a firstborn takes a double portion of the value of a loan itself, but not of the interest. This is what we were discussing at the end of yesterday. The firstborn inherits a double portion compared to his brothers of property that the father had in his possession at the time that he died. We were talking yesterday about, well, property that he had in his possession, what if it was enhanced? Like he owned a cow and a calf was born to that cow. So if the brothers didn't do anything to cause that enhancement, it's considered part of the estate, and the firstborn gets his double portion in the value of that enhancement. On the other hand, if it was something that was due to the father, like property that he was going to inherit, from his father, but he died, he predeceased his own father. So then the heirs are going to end up inheriting their grandfather's property, but the firstborn won't take a double portion in that, since it was only due to their father, DUE, but he hadn't received it into his possession yet. So at the end of yesterday, we were talking about, what about a loan? So their father lent out some money to someone. It's owed to him when it comes in after the father dies. So that money wasn't in the possession of the father. He had a right to it since he had lent it to somebody. When it comes in, it's going to go to his heirs, but does the firstborn take a double portion in that or not? We're seeing a debate on this point. And then one question is, does the firstborn take a double portion of this money that's coming in to repay a loan to their father? And if the father had lent money to a non-Jew and was able to charge interest, does the firstborn get a double portion in that interest? So we're continuing that discussion. Okay. Right, so Meimar came to our location and said that a firstborn takes a double portion in the value of the loan, the principal of the loan, but not in the interest. So Ravina said to him, the sages of Nehardea conform to their standard line of reasoning. Meimar followed the opinion of Rav Nachman, who was one of the sages of Nehardea, as was Meimar. So the Gemara explains, as Rabbah says, if the sons collected land as payment of a debt owed to their father was owed money. When he died, that debt was still outstanding. The borrower repaid the loan, but he used land to repay the loan. So now perhaps the father lent out money, and now the heirs are going to receive as repayment of that debt land. So a different form of property. If the sons collected land as payment of a debt that was owed to their father, the firstborn has a double portion in that land. But if the sons collected money, then the firstborn does not have a double portion. That's Rav. Rav Nachman says that if the sons collected money, the firstborn has a double portion. And if they collected land, he does not have a double portion. The opposite ruling, entirely opposite. Let's learn why. Abaye said to Rabbah, according to your opinion, it is difficult. And according to the opinion of Rav Nachman, it is also difficult. What are the difficulties? According to your opinion, it is difficult. I'm sorry, we picked it up at the bottom of 124b. Now we're at the top of 125a. According to your opinion, it is difficult because what is different about money, resulting in the law that the firstborn is not entitled to a double portion of it, is that their father did not leave them this specific money that was collected, right? He had the right to receive an amount of money, but that particular bundle of money, that bag of coins or that wad of cash, was not in his possession at the time that he died. And the general rule is, right, what's in the possession of the father, when it gets divided among his heirs, the firstborn gets a double portion. What is due to the father, but not already in his possession, the firstborn doesn't get a double portion. So this money that comes in wasn't the same money that he lent out. It might have the same value, but it's not the same money. So why would the firstborn get a double portion? And with regard to land as well, their father did not leave them this specific parcel of land when he died, as the debtor could have repaid them with a different parcel of land or with money. And furthermore, aren't you the one who said that the explanation of the people of the West, meaning Eretz Yisrael, is reasonable? Meaning, in a case where a married woman had been fit to inherit from her great-grandmother, but then she predeceased her great-grandmother. So this woman was going to inherit something from her great-grandmother, but she died before her great-grandmother died. Right? So she was due an inheritance from her great-grandmother, was coming to her. If her great-grandmother died before she did, this property that belonged to the great-grandmother would come to this wife. But this man's wife ends up dying before her great-grandmother died. So she died before the great-grandmother's property entered her possession. The question is going to be, does the husband inherit what belonged to the great-grandmother or not? So let's read again. In a case where a married woman had been fit to inherit, right, was in line to inherit from her great-grandmother, but then she died before her great-grandmother, and then the great-grandmother died. So this woman, the married woman's husband, claims, the widower, claims the inheritance in his late wife's stead. Right? So what this woman was going to inherit from her great-grandmother, since she died and the husband inherits from his wife, so now he says, okay, what was going to go to her from her great-grandmother, it should come to me. In that case, the sages of Eretz Yisrael, right, the sages in the land of Israel, at that time occupied by Rome, as opposed to the sages in Bava, in Babylonia, where they had greater freedom to learn and teach Torah, the sages of Eretz Yisrael ruled that he is not entitled to the inheritance, as it is merely property that was due to his wife, as opposed to already being in her possession. And a husband does not inherit property that is due to be inherited by his late wife, right? Yeah, it was due to her, but she died. And so the husband doesn't inherit the right to receive her inheritance that she had. Rabbah agreed that the inheritance is considered property due to the wife and not property possessed by her, as if the great-grandmother would have sold it before she died, her sale would have been a valid sale. There was no guarantee that this man's wife was ever going to actually inherit that property because her great-grandmother might have disposed of it in some other way. And here too, in the case of the sons with the firstborn, here too the land should be considered property due to the father, of which a firstborn is not entitled to a double portion, since the debtor could have sold it, and then the father never would have received the loan back, and then the son wouldn't have inherited it. Therefore, Rabbah's opinion is difficult when he says that the firstborn does get a double portion. Abaye continues, according to the opinion of Rav Nachman, it is also difficult. What is different about land, resulting in the law that the firstborn is not entitled to a double portion of it, is that their father did not leave them this specific parcel of land. Well, with regard to money as well, their father did not leave them this specific money when he died. This was a repayment of a loan that came in after he died. And furthermore, doesn't Rav Nachman say that Rabba bar Avu says, with regard to orphans who collected land for a debt that was owed to their father, right? So a debtor to the father has now repaid the loan with land that he gives to the orphans. With regard to orphans who collected land for a debt owed to their father's creditor can come and seize this land from them, as any land owned by the father is liened against his debts, right? In other words, this father, at the time that he died, he had both money coming to him because he had lent out money and there was a debtor that owed him money, and he himself owed money to someone else, money that he had borrowed and not paid back. So both the debtor can come to the inheritors, to the heirs, to pay back a loan, and the creditor can come to the heirs to get paid back for the money that the father owed. And so there's a lien in the credit against the debit, as it were, the credit against the debt, as it were. So how is this working? Their father's creditor can come and seize this land from them, as any land owned by the father is liened against his debts. So evidently, Rav Nachman holds that land which is liened against a debt has the legal status of land that is in the possession of the creditor. If so, why does Rav Nachman hold that a firstborn is not entitled to a double portion of land that is collected as payment of a debt? And Rabbah said to Abaye, according to my opinion, it is not difficult. And according to the opinion of Rav Nachman, it is also not difficult. We were merely saying, meaning explaining, the reason for the opinion of the sages of the West in Eretz Yisrael, which was introduced with the phrase, they sent the following ruling from there, that a firstborn is entitled to a double portion of the payment of a debt. That's actually not as clear as it sounds. It needs to be explained. What's he saying? But we ourselves do not hold in accordance with the opinion of the sages of the West. We're over here in the East, in Bava. Therefore, one cannot raise a contradiction from our opinions, stated elsewhere, to what we said in explanation of the sages of Eretz Yisrael. So having mentioned in passing the case of the great-grandmother, about a wife who's due to inherit and her husband inheriting or not inheriting from her, the Gemara now discusses that case in greater depth. So what is the case of the great-grandmother that was mentioned by Abaye? The Gemara explains, there was a certain moribund person on their deathbed who said to those present, now we're on page 125b, all my property is given to my grandmother. He's lying sick. He's worried about his elderly grandmother. And he says, my property goes to my grandmother, right? So that she will be safe in her old age. And after she dies, then it is given to my heirs, not inherited by her heirs, right? So he's saying that my estate is going to be used to support my grandmother in her old age. And if there's something left of it after she dies, then it doesn't go to her heirs, it goes to my heirs, right? So it would be nice to just give it to my heirs, but then I'm afraid that they might not take care of my grandmother. So it goes first to my grandmother, and then upon her death, then it goes to my heirs. That was what he said on his deathbed. And then this man died. He had a married daughter who died during the lifetime of her husband and during the lifetime of her father's grandmother. So, after her father's grandmother died, her husband came and claimed the inheritance as his wife was the heir of her father, and he is the heir of his wife. Rav Huna said, when her father said that his property is given to my heirs, right after my grandmother dies, he meant, and even to the heirs of my heirs. Therefore, since his daughter's husband is the heir of his heir, he is entitled to the inheritance. And Rav Anan said that this original dying man said, to my heirs, but not to the heirs of my heirs. Therefore, the husband is not entitled to the property. And the Gemara relates, they sent a ruling from there, Eretz Yisrael. Right? They did, since they were disagreeing, two rabbis were disagreeing, they sent, the question to higher authority. So they sent a ruling from Eretz Yisrael that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Anan, right? The second opinion that the woman would have inherited as the heir of her father who died, and the money went up to the grandmother and then down to the daughter, but that her husband would not inherit from her, presumably because at the time that she died, her great-grandmother was still alive, so therefore it was something that was due to come to her but was not yet in her possession, and therefore the husband cannot inherit. Or perhaps the husband doesn't inherit simply because the original wish of the dying man was, my heirs will inherit this after my grandmother, but not the heirs of my heirs, which seems to be what Rav Anan was saying. And so the sages of the West said, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Anan, but not due to his reasoning. And the Gemara explains, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Anan, that the husband does not inherit the property, but not because of the reasoning of Rav Anan. As Rav Anan holds that even if his daughter had a son to inherit from her, he would not inherit the property, since the father bequeathed it only to his heirs, but not to the heirs of his heirs. And that is not so. As if his daughter had a son, he would certainly inherit from his mother. And this is the reason that the husband does not inherit, because the inheritance is considered property that was due to the daughter, as she did not own it during her lifetime, and a husband does not take in inheritance property that is due to his wife, as he would property that was already in her possession. The Gemara asks, by inference, does Rav Huna, who ruled that the husband is entitled to the inheritance, hold that a husband takes in inheritance property that is due to his wife in the same way that he does property that she already possesses? Right? Rav Huna was the one who disagreed with Rav Anan. So Rabbi Elazar says, this matter was introduced by great sages, namely Rav Huna, and concluded by lesser sages, i.e. by me. Rabbi Elazar, humbly referring to himself as a lesser sage, will now explain Rav Huna's statement. Anyone who says to another, upon granting him an inheritance or a gift, after you die, it is given to so-and-so, he is considered like one who says, it is given to so-and-so from now. So in other words, if I have a friend named Jerry, and I have another friend named Paul, and I say, okay, listen, when I die, Jerry gets my house for as long as he lives, but when Jerry dies, it goes to Paul, right? So it's not going to go to Jerry's sons or other heirs. When Jerry dies, it's going to Paul, right? So it's simply a gift to Jerry for his lifetime. In that case, what Rabbi Elazar is saying is that it's considered like I've already given it to Paul. Paul is the actual owner, but he won't have the use of it until Jerry dies. But Jerry is never considered the owner. He's only getting like a lifetime lease for his lifetime, but the actual owner is Paul. So when you say I'm going to give it to so-and-so until he dies, and then it goes to someone else, the someone else is the owner right away. It's considered, legally speaking. The first recipient merely has the right to use the property during his lifetime, but did not actually become the owner. Accordingly, in our case of the father who gave to his grandmother, saying that it would go to his heirs afterward, accordingly, the inheritance was owned by the daughter in her lifetime, and the great-grandmother merely had usage rights. Therefore, it would be inherited by the husband. Rabbah said the explanation of the people of the West that the inheritance is considered property due to the daughter and not property possessed by her is reasonable, as if the grandmother would have sold it before she died, her sale would have been a valid sale, and the daughter would not have received it at all, which is interesting, right? Even though the man on his deathbed said, I'm giving it to my grandmother, and then after she dies, it goes to my heirs. So you would think that the grandmother, if she then sold the property, because maybe like she couldn't use the house and she needs the money, and so she sells the house and now she receives the money, so there won't be a house to pass down to the man's heirs, in this case a daughter. So you might think that that sale would not be a valid sale, but now we're learning it would be a valid sale. Therefore, there never was a guarantee that the man's daughter would receive property after it was in the grandmother's possession. And that's why we would say it was due to her, she was fit to inherit it, but it never entered her possession. In conclusion, Rav Papa said that the law is that the husband does not take in inheritance property that is due to his wife as he does the property that is in her possession. That is the law. And a firstborn does not take a double portion of property that is due to his father as he would property that his father possessed, and that is the law. And a firstborn does not take a double portion of payment for a loan, whether the brothers collected land or whether they collected money. And that is the law in accordance with Rav Papa. Then they add in the note here that if collateral was liened to the loan, then the firstborn is entitled to a double portion, as it is considered as though the debt was already collected during the lifetime of the father, since that loan was made with collateral. It was a guaranteed secure loan. That would make it a different situation. Now we're on page 126a. And as for a loan that is with the firstborn, i.e., if a firstborn had borrowed money from his father and then his father died, it is uncertain whether the payment should be considered property due to the father or property possessed by him. Therefore, the firstborn and his brothers divide the additional portion. New subject. With regard to the law that the firstborn is not entitled to a double portion of the enhancement of property resulting from the actions of the heirs, right? So the father owned the field, he died, you would split, and there were, let's say, 3 sons. So normally you would split that field into 4 portions. The firstborn would get 2 of them, and the other 2 brothers would get 1 portion each. Let's say that before they divided it up, the other brothers just went in, the younger brothers, went in and cultivated the field and made it bring in a big crop, very profitable crop. Now, there's the land itself, and now there's also the value of this crop that they brought in through their labor. So does the firstborn get a double portion of the value of that crop? No. He would get a double portion of the land. That's what the father possessed at the time that he died. But this enhancement that was created by the investment of time and effort and even money, perhaps, of his brothers, the firstborn does not get a double portion of that enhancement because they created it. On the other hand, if the father left a cow and the cow had a calf, the brothers didn't do anything extra for this calf to come into existence, so the firstborn would get a double portion of the value of that calf. That's the difference between an enhancement that just happens and an enhancement that they bring about, that the inheritors bring about. Okay, so with regard to the law that the firstborn is not entitled to a double portion of the enhancement of the property that was resulting from the actions of the inheritors, Rav Huna says that Rav Asi says, a firstborn who protested the efforts of enhancing the property before it is divided has protested. He has lodged a proper protest. And if the brothers use resources from the estate to enhance it against his will, he is entitled to a double portion of the enhanced value. Like if they didn't have the right to plant the field in this way without his permission, right? They did it without his permission. Therefore, and if he protests and says, you are doing this against my will, then he has lodged a proper protest, and even though they brought in a bumper crop through their labor, he will get a double portion of that crop. Now, Rabbah said that Rav Asi's opinion is reasonable in a case where they inherited grapes on a grapevine, and the brothers harvested the grapes against the will of the firstborn, or if they inherited olives on olive trees, and the brothers harvested them. As in these cases, the produce itself did not change. But if they treaded on them, right, they turned the grapes into wine or turned the olives into olive oil, then even if the firstborn protested their doing so, he is not entitled to a double portion. And Rav Yosef said, even if they treaded on them, the firstborn is entitled to a double portion. And the Gemara asks, why is he entitled to a double portion? According to Rav Yosef, even if they treaded on them, since the brothers transformed the produce, they didn't just do work to it and make it more valuable. They turned it from one thing into another. They turned it from olives into olive oil. It is now a different substance. Since the brothers transformed the produce, as initially it was in the form of grapes and now it is wine, so they have acquired it in the same manner that a thief acquires an item that he stole. Right? Legally speaking, he has acquired it. Now, he's still liable to make restitution to the person he stole from, but he has acquired it in the sense that if it is then taken from him, there's legal ramifications to that. Now, therefore, the firstborn should have no share of the enhancement. And the Gemara answers, Rav Yosef did not mean that the firstborn is entitled to a double portion of the enhanced value of the wine. Rather, his intention was the same as that which Rav Ukva Bar Chama says in a different context, that the ruling is referring to a case where the wine spoiled, its value decreasing to below the initial value of the grapes, in which case the brothers must give the firstborn payment for the damage, not only to his portion, the same as their portions, but since he had a double portion, he suffered twice as much damage, and they have to make that good. And here too, Rav Yosef meant that the brothers must give the firstborn payment for the damage to his grapes, meaning to his double portion of the grapes. And the Gemara explains where, i.e. in what context, was the statement of Rav Ukva Bar Chama stated. It was in reference to that which Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says. With regard to a firstborn and an ordinary son whose father left them grapes, and they harvested them, or if he left them olives and they harvested them, the firstborn takes a double portion. This is the law even if they treaded on them. And the Gemara asks, why is he entitled to a double portion if they treaded on them? Initially they were grapes, and now it is wine. And Mar Ukva Bar Chama says, Shmuel did not mean that he is entitled to a double portion of the wine. Rather, the reference is to a case where the wine spoiled, its value decreasing to below the initial value of the grapes, in which case the ordinary brother must give the firstborn payment for the damage to his grapes, which is the damage of a double portion. New subject, Rav Asi says, a firstborn who took a portion of the property like that of an ordinary heir has relinquished his right to an additional portion. A firstborn who took a portion of the property like that of an ordinary heir has relinquished his right to the additional portion. That's a little unexpected, right? I'm reminded of in a poker game, sometimes you're playing a more complicated game like, Omaha or something, where there's a high and a low, and people get confused, and a guy will say, "Oh yeah, I have, I have a full house," and somebody else said, "Well, actually, you have a straight flush. You didn't see that wild card gives you an even better hand." And so the question is, and so with his full house, he loses, and with his straight flush, he wins. So he didn't know that he was holding the winning hand. Do the cards speak, right? He has a winning hand on the table, therefore he wins. Or was it what he thought he was playing with, the full house, and therefore he loses the hand? Which is it? And, different groups of friends have different rules on that. Do the cards speak? Or does what the person declares speak? I think like in World Series of Poker, you don't have to say anything. You just put the cards down and the dealer will figure it out for you, what your best hand is. And it's not always so obvious if you watch poker. So here's a firstborn who was entitled to a double portion. But maybe he was the ignorant one in the family and he didn't know he's entitled to a double portion. And he went in and he divided up the property and took a single portion for himself. He didn't wait for it to be properly distributed where he would have got a double portion. And according to this, what he took, he took. He's only going to get a single portion now. He had the opportunity to take a double portion. He didn't take a double portion. So now he's only going to get a single portion. The Gemara asks, what does it mean that he has relinquished his additional portion? Rav Papa says in the name of Rava that he has relinquished his additional portion only with regard to that field that was divided, since he did not exercise his right to an additional portion, but he has not relinquished his right to receive an additional portion in the rest of the estate. Rav Papi says in the name of Rava that he has relinquished his additional portion with regard to all of the property. Now that he's acting like an ordinary brother, ordinary inheritor, no double portion, that's what he's going to end up with. And the Gemara explains, Rav Papa says in the name of Rava that he has relinquished his additional portion only with regard to that field that was divided, because he holds that a firstborn does not have a right to his additional portion before the division of the property, and therefore he has waived his additional portion of what has already reached his possession, namely the field that was divided, but he has not waived his portion of the other fields in the estate that are yet to be divided. And Rav Papi says in the name of Rava that he has relinquished his additional portion with regard to all of the property, as he holds that a firstborn has a right to his additional portion before the division of the property. And therefore, since he waived his additional portion in his field, he has waived his portion of all the property. In both cases, if he acts like he's only going to get a single portion, it's as if he waived his right to the double portion, and that's all he's going to get is the single portion. And the Gemara notes, and this dispute of Rav Papi and Rav Papa was not stated explicitly. Rather, it was stated by inference, as there was a certain firstborn who went and sold his property and the property of his deceased ordinary brother, i.e. their respective portions of their father's property, before the property was divided. And the orphan sons of the ordinary brother went to eat dates from the field that was now in the possession of those purchasers due to their father's share in the field. And the purchasers hit them, punched them, as though they were thieves. And the relatives of the orphans said to the purchasers, not only did you purchase their property illegally, since it was divided before they participated in the division, but you now are going to hit them as well, like they're like they're thieves? And the case came before Rava, who said to them, the firstborn has done nothing. Meaning, when the firstborn divided up this property without a proper division, his sale was not valid. Now we're on page 126b. And Rav Papi and Rav Papa disagree with regard to what was Rava's intention when he said that the sale created by the firstborn was not valid. So one sage, Rav Papi, holds that he has done nothing with regard to his brother's portion, as he had no right to sell it. With regard to his own additional portion, the sale was valid, as it was in his possession even before the division of the property. And the other sage, Rav Papa, holds that he has done nothing with regard to all of the property, as he does not possess the additional portion before the property is divided between the brothers. And the Gemara notes that they sent a ruling from Eretz Yisrael, that a firstborn who sold his additional portion, right, his extra portion because he's the firstborn, before the division of the property, he has done nothing. In other words, the sale will not stand. It's not a valid sale. So apparently, the sages of Eretz Yisrael hold that a firstborn does not have a right to his additional portion before the estate is divided up. But the law is that a firstborn has a right to his additional portion even before the division of the estate. And the Gemara relates, Mar Zutra of the house of Rishba, who was a firstborn, divided a basket of peppers from the estate of his father with his brothers equally. And he came before Rav Ashi to claim a double portion of the rest of the estate. And Rav Ashi said to him, well, since you relinquished your additional portion with respect to some of the estate, you have relinquished your additional portion with regard to all of the property, as a firstborn has a right to his additional portion before the division. So that was a place where he didn't really think it through, and he just wanted to do something equal with his brothers, and it hurt him. So bottom line, if, God forbid, a parent dies and you're aware that there are inheritors, so they shouldn't do anything until they talk with a lawyer and a rabbi if their inheritance is going to be subject to Torah law. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 8. We're on 126b. We're just going to read Mishnah number 5 in the very beginning of the Gemara, but I'm almost done. So questions or comments, please get them in now. Nina's still a little under the weather, so I'll be scanning the comments for the questions. In a case of one who says, so-and-so, my firstborn son, will not take a double portion of my estate. Or one who says, so-and-so, my son, will not inherit my estate among his brothers. He has said nothing, as this father has stipulated counter to that which is written in the Torah. Now, didn't you hear me say a few days ago that all these laws about the firstborn, double portion, all the other ones get equal single portions? And this is in the absence of a will, because if there's a will, then we're going to follow the will, even if it's different than this kind of distribution. And in fact, you could, write in your will that none of your children, God forbid, will inherit. You're going to give it all to some foundation. So doesn't that directly contradict this Mishnah? Not so fast. With regard to one on his deathbed who apportions his property orally, granting it to his sons as a gift, and he increased the portion given to one of his sons and reduced the portion given to another son, or he equated the portion of the firstborn to the portions of the other sons, his statement stands. But if he said that they will receive the property not as a gift, but rather as an inheritance, then he has said nothing, because he violates what it says in the Torah. If he wrote in his will, whether at the beginning or in the middle or at the end, that he is granting them the property as a gift, his statement stands, because you can give away your property to whoever you want. But if you write that this is an inheritance to my kids in a manner that contradicts Torah law, then that statement is meaningless. So what's interesting is you can achieve a distribution to your heirs that's different than Torah law, but you can't state it in a way that directly contradicts Torah law. You have to understand, what Torah law says about inheritance, and consult with your rabbi at the time that your estate lawyer is drawing up your estate. And by the way, there are many estate lawyers that understand these nuances of Jewish law, and you just ask them to make sure that it's adhered to, it should be okay. But that was interesting that if you have anywhere in the will the language of gift, even though it also says inheritance, but it also says gift, then it's going to work. But if you're stating something that on its face contradicts Torah law, then it's as if you said nothing. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Gemara suggests, let us say that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. As if it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, doesn't he say elsewhere that if one stipulates counter to that which is written in the Torah with regard to monetary matters, his stipulation stands? As it is taught in a Baraisa, Tractate Kiddushin, if one says to a woman, you are hereby betrothed to me on the condition that you have no ability to claim from me food, clothing, and conjugal rights, she is betrothed, and his stipulation is void. He does owe her all those things, even though he said, you're only betrothed to me on the condition that I don't owe you anything. You can't make that stipulation, so we ignore the stipulation. The betrothal is valid, as if there was no condition. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, with regard to monetary matters such as food and clothing, his stipulation stands. So he can't say, you're betrothed to me on condition that I don't owe you conjugal rights. But his stipulation will stand if he says, you're betrothed to me on condition that I don't have to buy your food and clothing. And she accepts, then he doesn't owe her food and clothing. So despite being counter to that which is written in the Torah, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, one should be able to stipulate that his firstborn son not receive a double portion, or that one of his sons not inherit from him at all, because inheritance is a monetary matter. Now the Gemara rejects this suggestion. Even if you say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, there the woman knew of his stipulation and waived her rights. Therefore the stipulation stands. She accepted the betrothal, knowing what the condition was. But here, the son whose portion was reduced, he didn't waive his portion. Therefore, the stipulation is not valid. So is it true that you have to bequeath to your children the way the Torah dictates that you are supposed to bequeath? Or can you make an inheritance that's contrary to what the Torah law says? We will continue that discussion on Friday, God willing, at noon Pacific, because there's definitely more ins and outs of this law before we get to where we said that you can stipulate contrary to the Torah according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, but that's also, too simple of a statement. So much more nuance to come on this subject. Tom, did the right of the firstborn to a double portion continue after the destruction of the second temple? Well, very interesting question. These sages are definitely living and, stating their opinions later than the destruction of the second temple. When we're talking about the Gemara, quite a bit later, right? As much as 400 years later. But some of these laws, even, it's like the Torah never changed, but our understanding of some of these laws did change, and even later than that. So, for example, it was on the books that a man could have two wives, even though the practice had gone completely out of practice, but it was still legal until about the year 1000. So it's only for the last 1,000 years, recent history in Jewish history, that a man is not permitted halachically to have two wives. So there were changes later, but am I going to draw the line about double portion at the end of the Second Temple period? No, right? Because they're still talking about the double portion. Was some aspect of that changed at the end of the Second Temple period? Quite possibly, I'm not sure off the top of my head. Does that kind of oral statement constitute a legal will? So I think you're talking about a deathbed statement. So there's definitely sort of relaxed requirements for a will if it's someone on his deathbed, right? When somebody's on his deathbed and he doesn't have time, to get a lawyer there and draw up a will with all the legal niceties, etc., we're still going to follow it as long as it was witnessed and certain other conditions are met. So there's definitely a difference between an oral statement, whether of gift or of bequest, that's made on a deathbed versus not on a deathbed. I mean, there's a lot of ins and outs of that, but it's enough for now to say that there is a difference. I think that's all with the questions on there. And on the YouTube side, Joseph, can you summarize those dafs like yesterday that speak of majority opinion versus minority? When can the majority be proven wrong? So there we were talking about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right? Who redacted the Mishna, and so they were arguing about whether somebody at the level of Rebbe, right, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, whenever it's him versus one other colleague, we follow Rebbe. And what they were arguing about is, well, okay, we understand that Rebbe is very authoritative, and him versus one other sage, he always wins. We follow him. But if it's him versus a majority, him versus two or more of his colleagues, people at his level, very high level sages. So if multiple sages disagree with Rebbe, do we still follow Rebbe? And later sages argued on that. Some said, we always follow Rebbe, even in his debates, in his disputes with multiple other sages. Whereas other later sages said, no, we follow Rebbe versus one colleague. We don't follow Rebbe versus multiple colleagues. And where did it end up? I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that generally speaking, we're going to say that we follow him versus one, and we often follow him, but not necessarily when it's him versus multiple colleagues. But whenever we have a question of what is the law, we don't paskin from the Gemara. Right? We don't paskin halacha from the Gemara, meaning we don't look into the pages of the Talmud and say that on such and such a page and such a tractate, it says, and the halacha is, because that might contradict a ruling on the same question in another tractate where there's not a different answer. And that's why we rely on great giants of Jewish law since the Gemara was completed around the year 500, like Shulchan Aruch, right, where it says, and the halacha is, right, after all these debates were taken into account, this is where the law ends up. So we look that up in Shulchan Aruch, or we read Rambam in Mishna Torah, and that's why, we don't personally go and search through all the volumes of the Talmud, since we drive ourselves crazy, and we don't need to, because reference works have been made for that. That's why the Koran is nice, because it'll tell you when there's questions like that, go back and forth. In the footnote, it'll say that the halacha that we follow today is, and it'll give you a source how we know that in Shulchan Aruch or in Rambam, etc. And even there, sometimes there are modern sages that will disagree on a subtlety of it. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again Friday at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Have a good night.